The school hallways were silent, long after the last bell had rung. Fluorescent lights flickered above, casting soft glows on empty lockers. At the far end, a lone figure moved slowly, a janitor, bent with years of quiet labor, pushing his broom across the dusty floor. His presence was as familiar as the walls themselves, yet unnoticed by the countless footsteps that filled this place by day. But tonight, he was not entirely unseen. Sitting cross-legged near a classroom door, a little girl with pigtails and a box of crayons watched him carefully. Her small hands moved across paper, sketching shapes and colors only she understood. Where others saw a man with a mop, she saw something different, someone kind, gentle, and quietly important. Neither of them knew that her innocent drawing, her fragile crayon note, would travel farther than she could imagine, reaching the eyes of a CEO and breaking his heart wide open. By day, the school bustled with life, the chatter of students, the hurried steps of teachers, the ringing of bells that commanded attention. But through it all, one figure remained invisible. The janitor moved quietly in the background, his cart of cleaning supplies rattling softly like an echo no one cared to hear. To most, he was just a shadow, a man who swept up their mess so they could walk on clean floors. His name was Samuel. Years ago, Samuel had dreams of becoming a carpenter, of building homes that families could fill with laughter. But life, with its sharp turns and cruel timings, had led him here, to late nights in empty corridors, a mop in his hand instead of tools. Poverty had stripped him of choices, but not of dignity. He worked with steady patience, taking pride in what little he could control. Each day was a repetition. He entered before dawn, long before the first student arrived, and stayed late into the evening after the last one left. Teachers brushed past him, barely offering a nod. Parents didn't notice him when they rushed to pick up their children. Students laughed and played, often leaving scraps and spills behind, never pausing to see the man who made their school livable again by the next morning. Yet in his quietness there was kindness. When a balloon drifted from a child's birthday, it was Samuel who retrieved it and tied it back to the desk. When a desk leg wobbled dangerously, it was Samuel who fixed it with nothing but tape and persistence. When he saw a child crying, he would hum softly, sweeping closer as if to comfort without intruding. But the world rarely noticed. His shoes were worn thin, his back ached from years of bending, and his hands carried the calluses of endless work. He had no fancy suit, no office, no authority. In a place that celebrated achievements, grades, and titles, Samuel was none of those things. And yet he carried himself with a quiet grace. He never complained. He never sought recognition. His only reward was the simple thought that the children walked into a cleaner, safer school because of him. Still, there were nights when loneliness pressed heavy on his heart. Walking home through dark streets, he wondered if his life truly mattered to anyone. Did anyone even know his name? Did anyone care that he gave so much of himself, only to remain unseen? It was in those silent questions, unanswered and heavy, that his worth hung fragile. And it was in that fragile space that one child, with crayons in her hand and compassion in her heart, was about to change everything. Her name was Emily. She was only 7 years old, with wide, curious eyes that noticed details others missed. Where adults rushed past without seeing, Emily lingered, observing quietly. To her, the world wasn't divided into important and unimportant people. Everyone was a story waiting to be understood. From her small desk in the corner of the classroom, she often noticed Samuel, the janitor. While teachers gave lessons and students scribbled notes, Emily's gaze would drift to the doorway, where Samuel passed by, pushing his mop bucket with slow, steady hands. He never interrupted, never demanded attention, yet Emily saw something others didn't. Kindness in the way he moved, gentleness in the way he handled even the smallest things. One afternoon, Emily dropped her pencil under her desk. Before she could bend down, Samuel, passing by, stooped with effort, picked it up, and placed it carefully on her desk. He smiled, a tired but warm smile, and walked away without a word. It was a tiny gesture, but in Emily's heart it grew large. She began to notice more. The way he swept carefully around children's shoes so as not to disturb them. How he fixed a loose door hinge no one else bothered about. How he paused in the hallway when he saw a child struggling to tie a shoelace, kneeling to help without seeking thanks. To most, these were invisible acts. To Emily, they were extraordinary. She began to think, why does no one thank him? Why does no one see him the way I do? At home, Emily often sat with her box of crayons, sketching colorful worlds from her imagination. But this time, her drawing had a purpose. She picked up a sheet of paper and began to create something simple yet powerful, a picture of a man with a broom, standing tall with a shining heart beside him. At the top, in wobbly handwriting, she wrote, "Thank you for cleaning our world." The note wasn't perfect. The colors spilled outside the lines, the letters leaned unevenly, but the message was pure, a child's gratitude captured in crayon strokes. Emily folded the paper and tucked it into her backpack. The next day, as Samuel passed her desk, she stood up shyly, clutching the note in her small hands. He paused, surprised, as she held it out. "This is for you," she said softly, almost whispering. Samuel looked at the crayon note, then at Emily. His hands trembled slightly as he took it. His eyes, used to being overlooked, filled with something rare, recognition, gratitude, and disbelief. No one had ever thanked him like this before. For Emily, it was just a drawing. For Samuel, it was everything. Neither of them could imagine how far that little piece of paper would travel, or whose heart it would shatter wide open. Samuel stared at the paper in his hands as though it were a treasure map, guiding him to something he thought he had lost long ago, a sense of worth. The crayon colors were bright, almost childlike in their uneven strokes, yet to him, they shone more brilliantly than gold. Emily stood in front of him, rocking nervously on her small shoes. She had no idea how deeply her drawing had pierced his heart. To her, it was simple. She saw kindness, and she wanted to say thank you. But for Samuel, who had spent years blending into the background, her recognition was a gift far greater than she could imagine. His throat tightened as he whispered, "For me." Emily nodded, her pigtails bouncing. "Yes, because you make everything clean, you help everybody." Samuel's eyes burned with tears he tried to hold back. His rough, calloused hands folded the note carefully, as though it might crumble if he touched it too harshly. He placed it gently into his shirt pocket, close to his chest. In that moment, the janitor, who had been invisible to so many, suddenly felt seen. That night, when he returned to his small apartment, Samuel didn't toss the note aside like old mail. Instead, he placed it on his worn nightstand, smoothing the edges as though it were something sacred. He read the wobbly handwriting over and over, each time hearing the child's innocent voice in his mind. "Thank you for cleaning our world." It had been years since anyone had thanked him for anything. Years since he had been given a gift without condition. He thought back to his younger days, when he used to build small birdhouses in his backyard, his neighbors praising his handiwork. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to be acknowledged. Emily's crayon note revived that memory, reminding him that his efforts mattered, even if no one said so aloud. Over the next few days, Samuel carried the note with him everywhere. Tucked in his pocket, it became his hidden strength. When his back ached from bending too long, when a teacher barked at him to hurry, or when students left the cafeteria in a mess, he would reach into his pocket, touch the folded paper, and breathe. It reminded him, at least one person saw him, at least one heart was grateful. But fate had other plans. One late afternoon, as he wiped down a row of lockers, the note slipped unnoticed from his pocket. It drifted to the floor, lying there in its childish colors, out of place against the dull, polished tiles. Samuel didn't see it. He continued his work, unaware that the small gift which meant so much to him was about to begin a journey far beyond what either he or Emily could imagine. Later that evening, a teacher spotted the note while walking to her car. Curious, she picked it up. Smiling at the sweet message, she placed it absent-mindedly on a stack of documents in the teacher's lounge. There, among graded papers and schedules, the note rested, a child's innocent gift waiting for the next pair of eyes. And those eyes would not belong to a teacher or a student, but to someone who held unimaginable power, the CEO of the school's sponsoring foundation. The note sat quietly on the teacher's lounge desk, surrounded by paperwork, coffee cups, and forgotten lesson plans. Bright crayon colors stood out sharply against the dull whites and grays of the adult world. Most who passed by barely gave it a glance. To them, it was just a child's doodle, something sweet but insignificant. But life has a strange way of letting small things fall into the right hands. That week, the school was preparing for an important visit. The CEO of the foundation that funded the school's programs, a man of influence, wealth, and impeccable suits, was scheduled to review the school's progress. His name carried weight, his presence demanded respect. Teachers scrambled to make everything appear perfect, students rehearsed polite greetings, and administrators hurried to ensure every corner gleamed. On the day of the visit, the lounge buzzed with nervous energy. Coffee brewed constantly, folders were stacked neatly, and everyone braced for the CEO's arrival. In the rush, no one noticed when the secretary, gathering a stack of reports, accidentally scooped up the crayon note with the rest of the paperwork. Later in the principal's office, the CEO sat at the long, polished table, flipping through spreadsheets, attendance charts, and budget proposals. His face was sharp, unreadable, the kind of expression that made people hesitate before speaking. He was a man trained to see numbers, results, and bottom lines, not colors, not crayon drawings. But then, in the middle of sterile graphs and typed reports, something unexpected caught his eye. It was the crayon note, bright, uneven letters spelling out, "Thank you for cleaning our world." A stick-figure man stood proudly with a broom in one hand, a red heart drawn beside him. The CEO froze, his fingers tightened on the page. For a long moment, he didn't move. The chatter in the room faded in his ears. He stared at the childish drawing, unable to look away. The administrators noticed the change in his expression. They shifted nervously, unsure if they had made some mistake. But the CEO wasn't angry, he was shaken. He leaned back slowly, the paper trembling in his hand. Memories, long buried under years of business deals and board meetings, began to stir. He was no longer in the polished office, no longer the powerful man with influence. In his mind, he was a boy again, standing in a dimly lit hallway where his own father once worked as a janitor. The drawing pierced through the walls he had built around himself. It reminded him of late nights when his father returned home exhausted, hands rough and shoulders heavy, yet still found the strength to smile. He remembered the smell of cleaning supplies, the sound of mop water sloshing, and the quiet dignity with which his father carried a job that others ignored. The CEO's throat tightened. For years, he had pushed those memories aside, too focused on success to revisit the struggles of his past. But now, with this simple crayon note in his hand, the weight of his father's sacrifices came rushing back. He set the note down on the polished table, staring at it as if it were a mirror reflecting a part of himself he had forgotten. Around him, the room remained silent. No one dared to interrupt. For the first time in years, the CEO felt his eyes sting with tears. He didn't know who wrote the note or for whom it was intended. All he knew was this: it had found him, and it had broken something open inside him that power and wealth could never mend. The CEO's fingers lingered on the paper as though it were fragile glass. His polished cufflinks glinted under the office lights, but all he saw was the uneven scrawl of a child's crayons. The words blurred as his eyes grew wet. "Thank you for cleaning our world." No one in the room dared to speak. Administrators exchanged uncertain glances, wondering why a powerful man had suddenly fallen silent. But the CEO wasn't in that room anymore. He was traveling backward in time, pulled into memories he had buried deep. He was 10 years old again, waiting outside a public school just like this one. His father, a janitor, walked slowly across the playground, carrying a heavy bucket in one hand and a broom in the other. The boy had been embarrassed that while his classmates' fathers wore suits, his own father smelled of bleach and cleaning fluid. But with time, embarrassment had shifted into understanding. He remembered his father's cracked hands, red from scrubbing floors. He remembered how those hands still found time to fix broken toys and stroke his hair gently when he couldn't sleep. He remembered late nights when his father came home exhausted, but never too tired to ask, "Did you finish your homework? Did you eat enough today?" Those images rushed back with unbearable clarity. He remembered watching his father through the crack of a classroom door, mopping quietly after the children had left. No applause, no recognition, just the silent rhythm of a man giving everything to a job that gave him nothing back. And he remembered one winter evening, the cold biting through his thin jacket, when his father bent down and told him, "Son, work is never about being seen. It's about knowing you did what was right, even if no one claps for you." The CEO pressed the crayon note against his chest, his breath uneven. For decades, he had built walls of steel around himself. He had clawed his way upward, earning respect, wealth, and power. But in chasing the world's approval, he had forgotten the man whose quiet strength had made it all possible. Now, a child's simple drawing had cracked those walls. He saw his father's tired eyes in the stick figure on the page. He felt the love in the child's heart-shaped crayon. And suddenly, he was no longer the untouchable executive. He was just a son who had never properly thanked his father before he passed away. The room blurred as tears welled, but he didn't wipe them away. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. "Do you know," he began, surprising everyone present, "my father was a janitor." The principal straightened in surprise. Teachers looked at one another. No one had expected such a confession. The CEO placed the crayon note gently on the table as though it were sacred. This could have been written for him. He spent his life unseen. He gave everything to a world that never said thank you. His voice cracked, heavy with emotion. "I swore I'd rise above it, that I'd never have to live in the shadows like he did, but in doing so, I forgot to honor him. I forgot to honor men like him." He stood abruptly, turning away from the table, his eyes red. For the first time in years, the polished mask of authority slipped, revealing something raw and human. The staff in the room didn't see a CEO anymore. They saw a man grieving, a man remembering. The CEO held the note tightly, as if afraid it might vanish. "Who wrote this?" he asked finally, his voice both desperate and reverent. No one in the room knew. It was just a child's drawing found among papers, but he was determined to find out. In that moment, he made a silent promise that he would not let this piece of paper fade into another forgotten memory. This note, so small and innocent, had given him back his father. And now, he would make sure the world finally saw the invisible men and women who worked in silence, just like his father once had. The next morning, the school buzzed with whispers. Staff members spoke in hushed tones about the CEO's sudden change of demeanor during his visit. Some thought he was angry, others thought he was ill. But only he knew the truth. A single crayon note had cracked open something inside him, and he could not rest until he found the man it honored. He walked the halls with purposeful steps, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the tiles. Teachers froze, children stared. He didn't care. He wasn't looking for board members or principals. He was searching for someone else, the man with the broom. At the end of the corridor, he saw him. Samuel was kneeling beside a trash bin, carefully tying the bag. His back was bent, his shirt worn, his movements slow from years of labor. He didn't notice the figure approaching until the polished shoes stopped inches from him. Samuel looked up, startled. The CEO, a man whose presence filled boardrooms and commanded respect, now stood over him, holding a folded crayon note in his hand. "You're the janitor here?" the CEO asked, his voice quieter than Samuel expected. Samuel nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir. I try to keep things in order." He wiped his hands nervously on his faded work pants, unsure if he had done something wrong. The CEO unfolded the note and held it out. "This was it meant for you." Samuel's breath caught. His eyes locked on the familiar colors, the uneven letters. Slowly, almost reverently, he reached out and touched the edge of the paper. "Yes, a little girl gave it to me." The CEO studied him, his voice trembling as he asked, "Do you know what this means?" Samuel shook his head, embarrassed. "It just made me feel seen. Nobody usually notices what I do, but she did." The CEO's throat tightened. He looked at Samuel, at his tired eyes, his bent back, his calloused hands, and for the first time in years, he saw not just a janitor, but his father's reflection. "My father was a man like you," the CEO whispered, his voice breaking. "He worked nights, cleaned schools, carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and no one ever thanked him." He paused, blinking back tears. "This note could have been written for him. It feels like it was." Samuel stood silently, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to him like this, especially not someone so powerful. The CEO's hand trembled as he pressed the note against his chest. "Men like you built the world the rest of us stand on, without recognition, without applause. I forgot that. I forgot him." Samuel lowered his gaze, humility etched into every line of his face. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. It isn't much." The CEO shook his head firmly. "No, it's everything. It's dignity, it's sacrifice, and it deserves to be honored." For a long moment, the hallway was silent. A man in a tailored suit and a man in faded overalls stood face to face, their worlds colliding. The invisible worker and the powerful leader bound together by a child's simple gift. Then, with a deep breath, the CEO spoke words that would change Samuel's life forever. "This school, these children, they need to know who you are, not just what you do. Tomorrow, everyone will." Samuel's heart pounded. He didn't understand what the CEO meant, but he could feel the weight of it. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He was being seen, truly seen, by someone who held the power to change everything. The janitor's life was never the same after that day. For years, he had been the invisible man, the one who worked while others slept, who scrubbed the floors until they shined but rarely received so much as a nod in return. But now people saw him, truly saw him. The CEO's announcement about the scholarship fund in his honor spread quickly. Newspapers wrote about it. Parents spoke of it in hushed amazement during school meetings. Teachers, once too busy to notice, began stopping to greet him every morning. "Good to see you, Mr. Daniels," they would say, using his name instead of brushing past. Students who had once hurried by without a glance now smiled, waved, even offered high fives as he polished the floors. For the first time, he felt that his presence mattered. The little girl who had written the note watched all of this with wide eyes. To her, it was proof that truth, even when scribbled in shaky crayon lines, had the power to move mountains. She no longer saw the janitor as just a quiet man with a mop. He was a hero. Her words had helped the world see what her heart already knew. Years passed, but the ripple of that crayon note never stopped. The scholarship fund grew. Dozens of children from families just like the janitors received help with books, tuition, and supplies. Many were the first in their families to attend college. Each time a student received aid, they were told the story of the janitor who worked in silence but taught the world a louder lesson than most teachers ever could. The janitor, now older but carrying himself with quiet pride, often sat at the back of the auditorium during award ceremonies. He never sought the spotlight, but when students spotted him, they'd run over to hug him, whispering, "Thank you. I'm here because of you." And though his hands were rough and his back often ached, his eyes shone with a joy deeper than words. As for the little girl, she grew into a young woman who carried that lesson everywhere she went. When she became a teacher herself, she kept the crayon note framed on her desk, not to remind herself of her own role, but to honor the man who taught her what compassion truly looked like. Her students often asked about it, and she would tell them the story. How one man's silent service, one child's honesty, and one CEO's awakening created a wave of change that touched lives far beyond their small town. And so, a janitor's devotion, once overlooked, became a legacy. His story lived on not in textbooks, but in the hearts of children who believed that even the smallest voice, or the humblest worker, could change the world. The years that followed carried with them a quiet transformation. The janitor, once invisible, became a living reminder that no one is truly unseen. no act too small to change the course of lives. The school, under the CEO's renewed vision, shifted from being just another academic institution to a place where kindness was woven into its very foundation. The little girl who had drawn the crayon note grew up, her innocence intact but sharpened with wisdom. She would often tell her friends and teachers that a single drawing can change a person's heart. That phrase spread, like sunlight spilling into dark corners, until it became a motto whispered in hallways and written on classroom walls. For the CEO, the note was a turning point etched into memory. His office, once a cold display of power and glass, now held that simple, framed crayon note at its center. Visitors would notice it and ask, "Why this? Why not a trophy or an award?" And he would smile, telling them the story of the janitor, the man whose quiet dignity inspired him more than boardrooms ever could. As for the janitor himself, he remained unchanged in his humility. He still swept the hallways, still greeted students with a gentle nod, still carried the quiet grace of a man at peace with who he was. But to the children, he was no longer invisible. They brought him notes, smiles, and even little gifts of appreciation. Some would stop just to talk, to share a piece of their day with the man who had become a quiet hero. And in the evenings, when the hallways fell silent again, the janitor would sometimes pause by the girls' old crayon drawings, carefully preserved, now displayed in the library, and shake his head softly, marveling at how something so small could ripple into something so vast. The story of the crayon note spread beyond the school walls. Local papers wrote about it. Parents told their children. And soon it wasn't just about one school or one man, it became a story of hope, a reminder to the world that kindness doesn't require wealth, position, or recognition. It only requires the courage to see and the humility to care. The CEO, once defined by numbers and deals, discovered that his greatest legacy wasn't in profits, but in people. The little girl discovered that her art could carry power greater than words. And the janitor, he discovered that being seen, truly seen, was the most profound gift of all. In the end, the crayon note was never just a drawing. It was a message, from the heart of a child to the heart of a man who had forgotten how to feel. A message that turned strangers into family and a school into a home. And so the story lingers, etched not on paper, but in the lives it touched. Proof that sometimes the smallest strokes of color can paint the brightest legacy. Time moved on, but the story of the janitor and the crayon note never faded. In the school hallways where it all began, children now whisper it like a legend. Teachers retell it as a lesson, and parents carry it home as a reminder of what truly matters. That single sheet of paper, marked not with perfect grammar or polished handwriting, but with the unfiltered heart of a child, became a seed of change far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The janitor, once invisible, was no longer just the man with a broom. He became a symbol of dedication, humility, and the dignity of honest work. Students greeted him with respect, not out of obligation, but with genuine affection. For them, he was proof that kindness and perseverance mattered more than status. The crayon note gave him more than recognition. It gave him back his identity, his worth, and the validation that he had been yearning for silently all along. The CEO, on the other hand, carried the note in his leather briefcase, tucked between contracts and financial statements. Whenever corporate meetings grew cold or profit margins became the only topic, he would glance at the faded colors of the little girl's handwriting and remember, success is empty without humanity. What the note stirred in him reshaped his life's mission. He established scholarships for children of custodians, cafeteria workers, and other overlooked employees, ensuring their families had opportunities he once ignored. He redirected his foundation to support community workers, not just boardroom initiatives. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the little girl herself. For her, that act of drawing and giving was not extraordinary. It was simply natural. Yet, as she grew older, she began to realize how profound it had been. That small moment of empathy became her compass in life. Inspired by the ripple her crayons created, she chose a path of service, dedicating her studies and career to ensuring that no one felt unseen. She would tell anyone who asked that it all began with a janitor who swept quietly, and a moment when her heart couldn't let his silence go unnoticed. The crayon note became framed in the principal's office, a daily reminder for staff and students alike. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Kindness changes everything." Generations of students would pause at that wall, wondering about the story, and walk away with a seed planted in their hearts, ready to bloom into action when the moment called for it. And so, what started as a quiet evening in an empty hallway grew into a legacy far greater than anyone expected. A janitor's humility, a child's innocence, and a CEO's awakening intertwined into a timeless truth. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest echoes, and sometimes the simplest gestures rewrite the story of countless lives.